12's a good game. I like 12. 12's good.
It's so dense and layered.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the beginning of the game might be the strongest part of it.
Yeah, I think so too, actually.
But I think we'll definitely get into that here in a minute.
Yeah.
So to kind of summarize, the whole opening of the game is about the fall of Dalmasca and its subsequent occupation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we are introduced to Vaughn, who is a war orphan whose brother was killed in the intro, and Vaughn decides he wants to reclaim the riches of Dalmasca in a daring robbery at the Imperial Palace.
He's our baby Robin Hood.
Yeah, I mean, basically.
Yeah.
And he also has like some slightly selfish motive where he wants to be a sky pirate because he wants to be free of occupation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so we basically get thrown through a bunch of machinations. He winds up sneaking in through the sewers to the palace and getting into the secret treasury of the Rabanastran Palace,
Mm-hmm.
where he finds a strange glimmering crystal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, right after that, he encounters a sky pirate and resident leading man, Balthier.
Famran Mia Bunanza, for those that know him in Arcades. Yeah, okay, I know like all the names in this game, okay? Like, this is information that will never leave me. Like, it's like in my brain. Like, I played this game at this point when like all my gray matter like soaked this up, and I was like super hyper focused and like obsessed with this game. I was like, oh my god, I know too much. You know, like Balthier has like 6 older brothers.
I did not.
Yeah, he has like...
The game does not mention them ever.
Yeah, he's like the youngest of like 6 siblings.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, it just, you know, small
Dr.
things.
Sid getting it on,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. You know, all fathers are absent fathers, Dr. Sid. Dr. Sidolphus.
Yes, we get introduced to Balthier and Fran, who is another character kind of like Penelo that I wish we knew more about in the game itself. She has a lot of interesting things going on, but I never feel like I actually understand her as a character.
I like Fran a lot as a character. I wish they did more with her other than like her just kind of like being there, if you know what I mean. But I like her personal arc with her sisters, and this idea of like sometimes you gotta step away from your family, and sometimes that's just that. And then things will never be the same, and that's the way you gotta deal with it. Like, I will admit, the first time I played this game, a lot of the political messages flew over my head because I was a kid, and I had just like gone through some really rough shit, and I cried at the end because I was like, oh man, it's like when you have like some really good friends and you do some really important shit together, and you kind of discover yourself, and you all like are tight, and then at the end, like, eventually life just has you go your separate ways. It's like how I felt at the end of the game with all these characters. I was like, damn, like they were really going through some stuff, and now they're not really together anymore. And it's like leaving everything behind and moving on and like becoming an adult, and I'm crying now.
But they are still together. Like, they're writing letters to each other and like sending each other gifts.
And Bosch is impersonating his dead brother, and it's weird, and you shouldn't be doing that.
That's a weird part.
Yeah. Please be me now, or there will probably be a civil war.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, he was able to... I mean, we're jumping way ahead. He was able to impersonate his brother to stop the war that was happening right immediately.
Yeah.
That was useful, but also it's pretty weird.
It only gets weird in Revenant Wings. We don't talk about Revenant Wings. That's just, I don't know, it's weird. I don't like thinking about Revenant Wings.
I don't know anything about that game.
It's a sequel, and they decide to make everybody pair up and be extremely heterosexual.
Oh,
yeah.
Great.
Yeah, they're like, oh yeah. There's like an entire arc where like Vaughn is jealous of some like ghost because Penelo's talking to him. And, you know, they gotta be, like, a couple now and shit, and then, like, Balthier and Fran are, like, explicitly a couple, which, you know, whatever. And then Bosch is like, I'm impersonating my brother, but I'm also in love with the queen, so it's like my brother is being with the queen. It's weird. I don't like it. I don't like Revenant Wings. The game didn't need a sequel. It didn't need a sequel.
I mean, I would have loved if they had made a game that was specifically about Balthier and Fran going on adventures.
That would have been really cool. But thankfully, they've canceled every single Final Fantasy XII project since, because Fortress was also going to happen, and that was going to be all kinds of fucked and bad.
Oh no. I don't even know what Fortress is.
Fortress was Square Enix outsourcing to Western developers, and they were like, let's make Final Fantasy XII but Skyrim, and you play Bosch. And it was just, and Larsa and Ash were gonna get married, and it was just like,
oh no,
yeah, they made Bosch like the main character, and he was completely mischaracterized, and like he and Ash were like a thing, but then he was like, I gotta let her go to fuck this kid, I guess.
Oh no. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like,
let's not talk about that anymore.
I'm laughing about
awful.
it because it's so bad.
It's awful. For the record, if you have not played Final Fantasy XII, Larsa is like a 12-year-old child in this game.
Yeah.
It's basically like the Anakin Skywalker, Natalie Portman thing, except that Ash is older than Padme was.
She's like 22 or something. No, she's like 9. Hang on. She's in her early 20s, I think. She could be 19. I'm not sure.
I mean, she got married, and then it was 2 years later, so it wouldn't surprise me if she was in her 20s.
In the manga, she got married pretty young, but they weren't even living together for a while. Like, it was like an arranged marriage type thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and like there was this whole thing with like her fucking like the Queen Regent trying to kill her, and like it was a whole ordeal. Please read the manga. It's a whole ordeal. Sometimes you pull the sheets back expecting to find Ash, and you find Bosch with a sword, arresting you for treason.
Gosh.
Yeah, you know, it is what it is. There's treason.
Treason.
Yeah.
So.
Speaking of treason.
I just have to say that I really like the dynamic between Balthier and Fran. I think that they're really cute together, and I like that there's that ambiguity in their relationship. Mm-hmm. Because they do seem like they're genuinely friends, but also I have no idea how they became friends.
And I don't need to know. All I know is that they're cool, and I'm pretty sure that Balthier does the talking and Fran does all of the heavy lifting, unfortunately.
Yeah. And they're both very insanely attractive beings, so I like seeing them together. Anyway, we are introduced to them, and they make a really cool, daring escape on a flying motorbike that we never see again.
Because it breaks, because Vaughn breaks it with his magic rock.
Yep. I feel like at some point it would have been useful for them to have a flying motorbike, but, whatever.
That motorbike was in so many promotional images, by the way, for the game.
Yeah, it was really cool looking.
That motorbike was even at Anime Expo the year before that game came out. I was at Anime Expo that year, and they had official Final Fantasy XII cosplayers. No, but they had a Fran cosplayer that was around there, along with a bunch of other cosplayers. And they had the life-size Gabranth armor there.
I don't think I could handle being in the physical presence of a Fran cosplayer.
She was really cute, yeah, and she wasn't brown. She wasn't black-facing either, which was really great.
Well,
yeah. It's the bare minimum with Japanese cosplayers, unfortunately.
Don't do that, please.
Yeah.
Please, if you're doing cosplay, please don't wear blackface
or brownface or yellowface or anything like that.
Yeah, just be yourself in a costume.
Yeah. So it was very cool seeing all that. I had no idea the game was coming out because, like, again, like it was so old and everything, and I was so young, and the internet wasn't like a super huge thing yet. And I was like, oh, wow, cool, what's this? Oh, this is Final Fantasy XII. I know that bike from that PlayStation magazine. Wow, like that kind of thing. Ooh, big suit of armor. Wow,
Honestly, the armor designs in this game are phenomenal. Like, I love them so much.
Do you want to know why Gabranth has a visor on his armor?
I do now.
Okay, so the lead character designer loves to go cycling.
Okay.
So Gabranth's armor has a visor on it for that reason. So when people found this out, there was so much banner of Gabranth just riding a bike, like, to work. Like everyone's like in a car and he's like on a bike just going, like sweating. Like, it's so funny.
I mean, honestly, it's a shame we never got to see him ride the super cool flying motorcycle.
Yeah, it just drops because of his weight on the armor. You never see that man run unless if Bosch is there, then you're just going at him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the stone causes a malfunction in the bike, which is weird. The two of, like, all three of them kind of go down and escape into the sewers.
Mm-hmm.
Right, this is also during a resistance attack on the capital, on the castle, and during this attack, we are also introduced to a woman named
Amalia.
Amalia. That's right. And she gets separated from the resistance and joins
Vossler.
up with
Vossler York Azalis.
That's right.
Member of the Dalmascan Knights.
And they run through the sewers, and I believe they've just eventually wind up in the dungeons. They get captured.
They get captured. Amalia gets taken in. They go to prison. Penelo gets taken by Begamnon, and then they're in the dungeons, and they run into somebody, to some people actually.
While in the dungeons,
Yeah.
they find Bosch suspended over a giant, endless pit of despair, which is probably the coolest prison I've ever seen for just one person.
Sometimes you just gotta extract that revenge in, like, the most extra way possible.
Right, yeah. Also, just keep in mind that Bosch was imprisoned for, like, 2 years and probably tortured quite a bit. And he's a very forgiving man, all things considered.
He feels a lot of guilt. Like, a lot of guilt. Again, if you read the manga, he literally tells, like, his whole life story to, like, Rex before Rex is injured at the hands of his twin brother. This is, like, when he's, like, sympathizing with Rex, when he's like, yeah, like, I wish, like, I could have, like, protected my family. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know what happened to my brother. Like, I basically ran off to, like, fight and everything. I went to Dalmasca so maybe I could fight and save my family. And who knows what happened to my little brother and everything. So I totally sympathize with you, Rex, for you trying to fight for your little brother. So that's, where Bosch is, like, very, like, I don't want to see more war orphans be war orphans kind of thing, and why he's part of, like, the Knights of Dalmasca and everything, and why he's fighting.
Yeah. They managed to spring Bosch, and that brings everyone out into kind of, like, a full party. I believe that's when you get the full party.
You need Ash. So what ends up happening is they spring Bosch out of prison.
Oh,
they
that's
go,
right. She doesn't fight with you.
And again, like, so old Dallin, it's implied that he was a former member of, like, the Knights of Dalmasca as well, maybe even a commander, because he gives that sword to Vaughn to give to Vossler to give to Bosch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a kind of, like, show of, like, allegiance, basically, in that, like, Bosch really is who he says he is. So you end up going with Vossler, and then you end up rescuing Amalia, and then some stuff happens, and then Vossler's a bit of a tragic figure in which he's, like, basically Vossler is a traitor, but he's doing what he can in order to keep his country safe, or how he believes he can best keep his country safe, even if it's, like, the wrong thing to do. Like, he basically sold Bosch out and everything in the beginning.
Yeah, he is a traitor who is trying to do right by his people. And it's kind of one of those things where he has bought into the occupation and does not believe that they can actually win, and so he has cut a deal to get the freedom of Dalmasca. We just skipped over, like, 10 hours of the game, didn't we?
No, this is literally all in the event. And then you get Ash, and then she's like, I have to get this one stone to then prove my birthright, because only I could have this stone, because it's the stone of the Dynast King, and that's how you get Belial. And what you don't know is that as you're doing this and you're unleashing the espers in the game, you're unsealing the espers that were originally sealed away, and they're like these great demonic beings that will now terrorize everybody in Final Fantasy Tactics 90 years later, bringing about the destruction of the evilies of this whole game. Anyways,
Cool.
yeah, just cool timeline things. And then you have to go...
And the game never really makes that clear. It's just kind of like, hey, they're these cool monsters that you can control.
Yeah, unless if you played Tactics, then you're like, why am I summoning Belius the Gigas? Why is this possible? Why am I summoning Cucullin or Andromelech? I don't know if I can do all of this, or Hashmel. And a lot of these... Huh? Go ahead.
I'm just also going to say, the Gigas are very underpowered for how big they are billed.
Oh, Belius the Gigas?
IMO.
Yeah.
I mean, no, not even just Belius, but like most of them. Like, throughout most of the game, it felt like a way better use of my mist power to just do the
Quickening?
combos.
Yeah, see, I don't use the summons, I just do the quickenings, because I just know. In my heart, I know that the quickenings will never fail me, and they never do, Judge Geese. They never fail me, Judge Geese. I always just quicken that entire fight. But yeah, then they get the stone, then they get... Okay, no, yeah. Then they get the stone, then they have to go to the Grand Kiltius.
Well, so... They go to Wraithwall's tomb, who is the Dynast King, who's a long-lost ancestor of Ash. Mm-hmm. And then while they are leaving there, they get captured again.
By Geese, who then explodes in his airship along with Vossler.
Right. I think that's when we learn that Vossler is the traitor.
Yeah, that's when they learn. And Vossler's like, oh man, sorry. And Bosch is like, don't worry, I'll carry on in your stead. And he's like, cool, I guess. And then just dies.
Cool, I wish you hadn't killed me.
No, I mean, they didn't really kill him. He's like, I'm just gonna stay here and die. And like, that's rough. Like, you're like reconciling with your bro that you like sold out. And then you're like, okay, I'm gonna stay here then, because guilt, is a powerful thing.
And Bosch is like, I totally get it, bro.
I totally understand.
I had to be put in prison and tortured for 2 years before I felt good enough to not be in prison and being tortured.
Man, he still feels like super guilty. Like every time Gabranth is in, he opens his mouth, and Gabranth, like, oh, I love that scene in the lighthouse where like they're talking Gabranth down from like attacking Ash and everything. And like Bosch is like, I'm here too, and Gabranth is like, ooh, you, and then he's ready to go again. Like if he had just kept his mouth shut, but yeah.
Honestly, a lot of the dialogue in that lighthouse is, I'm here too, from different characters.
Yeah. Oh, did you have Bosch in your party when you fought Gabranth, by the way?
Which time?
Both times.
Yes.
Yeah, you get special dialogue, and then he also just like autofocuses Bosch, and it's a great way to get some extra cutscenes. And it's a great way to mitigate damage.
I didn't really pick up on that, because at that point I was so over-leveled that I literally two-shot him in the lighthouse.
Yeah, if you just like wait a little bit, they get a cutscene where like Bosch is like, you can be better than this, and Gabranth is like, how fucking dare you? We're the same. We're both full of shit. You know it. You're just as bad as I am. Say it. Like that kind of thing.
Gabranth is like the emo younger brother.
He's mad about a lot, but it's understandable. Like,
I mean, yeah, he's like justifiably upset.
Yeah.
Every like that's part of what makes this game really unique and interesting, is that everyone, aside from like Vayne Solidor, has a somewhat justifiable perspective given their like context in the world.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Vayne's just there because he's like, well, my view and my way is the right way, and I will do anything to see what I want happen. Even if it means killing my older brothers. And there are people that obviously go along with it, like Balthier's father and everything.
Right, but each for their own reasons. Like, Cid doesn't believe in Vayne Solidor's mission. He's mostly just in it to
He wants to talk to rocks. He likes to talk to rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Cid loves rocks.
So the one of the special rocks, the special rock that they went to the tomb to get explodes, destroys an entire armada of ships, and that's when that's when they're like, we have to go talk to
The Grand Kiltius.
And so they're going okay. Again, this is a very political game. So the reason that they went to go get the rock in the first place was so that they could prove that Ashe was the queen, like the rightful queen of Dalmasca.
So that they could get the aid of Rosaria and Bujerba to basically push Arcades out of Dalmasca.
Right. And so when the stone exploded, that was good because it got them out of a jam, but it was also bad because that was the only way for them to prove Ashe was who she was. Until they decide to go to see the Grand Kiltius, who is kind of like this religious figure, and the Grand Kiltius can either help them like determine or justify Ashe as queen, or can like point her to where she can go to get like additional proof, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to travel across the land, and you get to the giant cold mountain where there are tons of refugees from Dalmasca?
Wait, can you repeat that again? Sorry, there's like so much going on.
Yeah, it's okay. They travel across the land, and they get to Mount Baromnescence.
Mount Baromises. Oh yeah, there are actually
Baromises.
refugees from Landis there too, actually.
Okay, so that's who all of the refugees were.
Well, it's from Dalmasca and Landis. If you talk to some people, like, oh yeah, we're from Landis. Like, our country got completely occupied and then fucking destroyed, like, years ago. Like, 20 or so years ago. And we're still out here and, like, nobody will help us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they go see the Grand Kiltius, and the Grand Kiltius is like, hey, go to the Shrine of Miriam, and... I forget what was in the Still Shrine.
Basically, you have to go there to get like another proof of like Ashe being
yeah,
queen.
you get the treaty blade.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or the Sword of Kings.
Yeah.
One of those. There are two swords like that. So you get the sword with which you can destroy Nethicite, or you can destroy these crystals that they've been collecting. And I think the goal is because they have discovered how powerful those crystals are, they need to go and destroy the original one.
No. She has to cut another stone from the Suncrest.
She doesn't know that the Suncrest exists yet. We're not quite there yet.
No, but that's what the sword is for. The sword is there to go and like get another stone, basically.
No, they get that sword at Gyrovagan.
Oh shit! Yeah, they do get that sword at Gyrovagan.
Yeah, so this one
there are a
is
lot
like,
of swords. All that matters if you play the game. One sword is rusty. One sword is not rusty and blue.
Right.
Yeah.
Like so because the crystal that they got from Wraithwall's tomb exploded, and they're like, oh crap, that's why Vayne Solidor wanted that first crystal. So, we can't let him have that because it's the equivalent of, like, a nuclear bomb. So, we need this sword that we can use to destroy that other crystal to make sure that he can't use it. Because the Bujerban resistance is, like, forming, and
but they
like,
can't
things
act.
Are starting to heat up.
Like, the Bujerban resistance cannot act because it was Marquis Ondor, like Halim Ondor, that announced that Bosch had been executed, right?
Oh my gosh. Also, we haven't explained what Bujerba is.
So Bujerba is like a city in the sky. They're a neutral city. And they are not active in the war against Rosaria and Arcades, but they have secretly been arming Rosarian and Dalmascan forces to eventually take up arms against Arcades, but the leader of Bujerba cannot openly come out about it, because if he did come out about it, then they would show that Bosch is in fact not dead, hence why Bosch is not dead yet, but only in prison and being tortured for 2 miserable years of his life, to then make him out to be a traitor, so then Arcades could just full-on occupy and destroy Bujerba.
Right.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of political intrigue in here. Play the game. It's good.
And Bujerba is valuable because they supposedly have these very valuable mines full of
I think magicite or nethicite.
magicite.
Yeah.
It's basically the fuel that allows things to like fly and stuff like that. So that makes it too valuable for them for the Empire to really want to mess with them too much.
Also, because if they mess with them, then Rosario will then come in.
Right.
Yeah.
But if they learn that Bujerba is like arming these dissidents and like actively opposing Arcades, then they would invade to put a stop to that and secure the magicite mines.
Exactly. That's why Larsa is also there.
Right. Exactly.
Larsa, who was also trying to prevent Arcades from invading any other countries. He's pursuing peace.
And I think part of like the wrinkle to that was that Larsa was there to look at the magicite, and he determined, oh, they don't actually have that much magicite anymore. And also I think they mentioned that they have a process to like manufacture magicite if they need
manufactured nethicite.
But is that I think they were also talking about manufactured magicite as well.
I think so, yeah. I could be wrong, but I know they were talking about manufactured nethicite in the mine, and they were like, yes, manufactured nethicite. For those of you that know what nethicite and magicite is, they're two completely different crystals that have two completely different purposes.
This is very complicated. As I'm talking about this, it's like, oh, this is pretty complicated.
Yeah, I mean,
so
it's good. It's I promise, it's not too overwhelming. Please play the game. It's good.
So there's magicite, which is kind of like the common magical crystal that runs most technology. And then there's nethicite, which is, I guess, like a more pure version of magicite. And
it's unusual in the fact that it can absorb mist and nullify the effect of magic.
Okay. And there are two types of nethicite. There's manufactured nethicite, which is made by humans, and then there is deifacted nethicite, which is made by the gods.
Yes, made by the Ocuria,
which we have not met them yet. Sort of, we've kind of met them, but not really. So they go to the Still Shrine of Miriam. They get the sword. They come back, and the Grand Kiltias has been murdered by Gabranth. No, a different
by
judge.
Bergen. Bergen, who has manufactured nethicite like imbued in his body at this point.
Yeah,
they're weaponizing manufactured nethicite now.
Turns out it's not super healthy for you, and he goes crazy and gets killed.
Well, you start seeing the Ocuria. That's the problem. You start seeing things you shouldn't see.
Is that? I was very unclear about what the nethicite actually did, aside from like, you know, your body's not made to have that much power in it, that much mist in it.
So basically, what ends up happening is you usually like become pseudo possessed, and you start to like lose your grip of reality, while your body is also like dealing with the physical effects of the manufactured nethicite.
Okay. Oh, yeah, we kind of get a taste for that from Fran, who goes crazy during like the first explosion on the that wipes out that armada.
Yeah, well, it's because she's a Viera, so she's very sensitive to magic. That's why.
Right, but like when you have nethicite implanted in you, it's kind of the same thing, I guess.
Yeah, for like a human body, I suppose. For like a hume, as they call them.
A hume. Yeah.
The hume.
Also, I love the way Vera talk. I just it's an accent that's hard for me to place.
It's from the Netherlands, I think.
Oh, it's very enjoyable. Yeah. I like it.
Either the Netherlands or Iceland. It's either one of those two. I forgot. I can't name off the top of my head. So, apologies to anybody that's super into lore and is screaming at me now, going one or the other.
Oh my gosh, you probably know more about Final Fantasy XII than like 99.5% of people.
I was really obsessed. Like, this was not healthy. I had a really bad obsession with this game. It was so much that Square Enix noticed me on Tumblr when I was sorting my Tumblr blog, and they sent me a bunch of 12 shit. They were like, "Oh, I see you really like Gabranth. You're not very good at hiding that. Do you want a bunch of Final Fantasy XII stuff?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, baby, yes I do."
Yeah,
Anyways.
baby.
Yeah.
So they kill Bergen,
Mm-hmm.
and at that point, I think that's the point they decide to go to Arcades.
Yeah. And meanwhile, in Arcades, Larsa's father has been killed by his own son, Vane, who is now
Whoa!
appointed...
Don't be pointing fingers. No one can prove that.
You know what? Everyone in the room knows, especially one specific person in that room knows.
He just tripped and fell onto a pen.
No, he just got poisoned and died. Sometimes your
Yeah.
liver gives out when you drink too much. But even the Emperor, there were cutscenes earlier in the game where the Emperor even sort of like knew his own demise was coming, that his own son was poisoning him, because he asked Gabranth, he was like, "Hey, do you want to be like a protector of my kid?" And Larsa, Gabranth was like, "Oh, I'd love to be his sword. It's all I know." And he's like, "I need you to be his shield." And Gabranth's like, like the white lady math face type thing. Like, all the numbers, and he's like, "Yeah, sure, okay, I guess I can be his shield. What does that mean?" So the Emperor had kind of foreseen his own death, and he even knew that Vane had been the one that basically caused the infighting with his brothers that led to their deaths. At Gabranth's hands, coincidentally enough, he was one that carried out those executions. Again,
And
manga and Ultimedia information.
Yeah, we never really see... Yeah, in the game, it is not hinted at all, as far as I could tell, that Solidor had any... or Vane Solidor had any siblings aside from Larsa.
Oh, no, they're mentioned quite a bit, actually. Like,
are they?
Yeah.
I did not catch that at all.
It's the phrasing, probably, because the game is like ye old English, basically, when it comes to how some people speak. Like, Drace and Gabranth talk about it in the hallway. He talks about it with Gabranth in, like, when he's, like, talking to him separately, when he's like, "Well, like, don't you care about, like, your brother, Like, don't you, like, not want to kill your brother?" And he's like, "Fuck that guy. No, absolutely. Absolutely, I would kill that guy." And he's like, "Okay. Alright, can you protect Larsa, please?" Like, that's, like, a whole conversation. Like, he knows about that, so it's obvious that he's like, "Yeah, my eldest son is probably gonna kill me soon, because I'm getting real sick all the time, and I'm coughing a bunch," and that's sort of, like, the foreshadowing to that. When you play it a second time, you're really like, "Oh, okay, I see, I didn't get it before, but that kind of thing." Vane also frames the Senate for killing his father, which then allows him to appoint himself the Emperor of Arcades.
Yeah, and this is interesting because Arcades had a Senate. It had kind of like this democratic structure to it.
Mm-hmm. It's inspired from of Rome, apparently. Like, that's what they said. It's Rome, so it's basically you elect your Caesar, and this Caesar happened to be so good they kept electing him for a while, and nobody wanted to elect his son, so his son kind of killed his way to the top.
Right. So, there's a famous saying about fascism, but like fascism is what happens when you bring colonial forces back to the homeland.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we actually see in this I'm blanking on the word. Consolation is what I want to say, but that's definitely not the right word. Consolidation.
Mm-hmm.
This consolidation of power in Vane, and the way that he remains through to the end of the game incredibly popular with the military, and is essentially that is able to disband the Senate and vilify them, and
then get the judges to infight so that one of them has to kill the one that defies him.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So
the judges who are effectively supposed to represent the check and balance system, that's that's their job basically. But in the end, they all, for the most part, all end up siding with Vane except for Drace, who was then killed by Gabranth.
Yep.
And then the rest of them continue. Again, Balthier says in the beginning, Arcadian judges, more like the guards of like the House Solidor and everything. Not that like they're really there to protect anything other than like House Solidor at this point and sort of reinforce whatever Vane or his father says. Like they're not really there existing as they should, but they're more existing for the benefit of the family and power at this point.
Right. And so, like, we not only see the effects of, like, the occupations and colonial rule in the beginning of the game, but we also, during this turn, is when we kind of are introduced to this growing specter of fascism in Arcades, and we see the military kind of coming home to enforce the will of this strong man that has seized power. And that is something that I don't think I've ever seen as done as well in another game. I can't think of anything that shows like that perfectly kind of how fascism operates.
No, I don't think so either. Like, I guess you have like Wolfenstein, but that's like, it's so like with the way it is now, like with the way Bethesda has kind of made it, it's almost like, I don't know, it's like almost like, and I don't mean to like degrade the way that Wolfenstein portrays like fascism or like Nazism or whatever, but it's very like,
it's very monstrous as opposed to understandably human.
Exactly. It's very like,
which is what makes it
popcorn
terrible.
Popcorn cinema Nazis, you know, like,
right,
like Sheila and the She-Wolf, like Sheila the She-Wolf of the SS or something like that, like more of these like B-movie like films.
Right. And like there can be a place for that, but it's kind of sad that Final Fantasy XII, a game that came out
in 2006,
14 years ago, has done this better than pretty much any other game out there. There is a game that I think just came out about the Polish resistance to the rise of Hitler's fascism.
Oh no, that's Germany. That's actually it's by German developers too in Berlin. It's mostly about like having to exist. It's called The Darkest Times, I think.
Yes, The Darkest of Times.
Through the Darkest of Times. It's actually made by German developers and whatnot, and it's pretty good. It's really good, but you have to be in the right space for that. If you're gonna check it out.
I played it at E3 last year, and that is another very heavy game. But it probably does a pretty good job of doing the same thing. But like, that's two examples really. And Frostpunk. I talked about Frostpunk a little bit on your stream and also on a previous episode. Frostpunk does an alright job, but it's a different kind of fascism. Anyway, just felt like that needed to be said. We can move on. So the gang goes to Arcades, and it's basically just a long road trip. It's kind of when the game opens up and lets you do all kinds of different side quests. It's when I did a lot of my leveling that got me too strong for everything else to follow in the game. And you eventually get to Arcades, and while you're there, you see Lowtown and see how stratified society is. There's a huge income inequality thing going on.
They legitimately do not let non-humans into the upper part of Arcades. You literally talk to some Mughals, and the Mughals are like, well, we thought we could come here, but we're just on the fringe of society now, and
and it's all everything about their society is about climbing upwards. It's very
You literally trade stuff for gossip
lonely.
to get ahead. Like they it's all about like that whole thing, you know?
Right. Well, and like what you get is basically a valueless piece of wood.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, for all your trouble, you know, gossiping, and just sharing stories with these people. It's very weird compared to all the other places you've been so far.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when you invade the, I almost said Shinra headquarters.
It's the Draclor Laboratory.
Draclor Laboratories. Thank you.
Yeah. We like dragons here.
Here or there be dragons.
Exactly.
They fight through the facility. They searching for the stone, and eventually they encounter Sid, aka Balthier's father, aka they don't make it clear that it's his father, really.
Yeah, because you don't really know that, like, you don't know Balthier's last name. Unless if you read the manual that came with the game, which games don't really come with anymore.
No.
Yeah, other than be like, oh, Dr. Sidolphus, I think it's Demen Bunanza. Yeah, Dr. Sidolphus Demen Bunanza. And it's Balthier.
Yeah.
Bunanza.
But you have learned at this point that Balthier was formerly in Arcades.
Yeah, he was
actually
a former
judge.
Yeah, that's like extra information, like manga Ultimania information. That he was a judge at like 16. He was really young, gone to the academy, was like a star pupil. His dad started talking to Rox. He was like, I don't want any of this, and I'm just gonna steal his airship and go. And he left.
And so we have this reunion, and Sid seems like a crazy person until we see that he's talking to this weird mystical entity called Vana, and Vana finally reveals itself as this weird dark crystal floating thing with eyes.
The Ocuria.
Yes, an Ocurian. We still aren't really sure what it is, but Sid's like, like you're not getting this crystal, but you should go to Girovagan. And then what follows is an escape from Dracula Laboratory, and they're like, hey, go to Girovagan. So you go on like another long walking trip to find this hidden temple or a hidden city, actually, that can only be accessed by using the power of a Gigas. And you are able to get into the city, and it's just a giant labyrinth of hallways, and you finally make it to the center, and that's where you meet the rest of the Okirians, who are really disconcerting, again, weird, disconcerting floating crystal people with eyes and no seemingly moving parts.
They were basically like an ancient, super old race of like beings that then like went back to Girovagan and isolated themselves and everything. But they're like the progenitor race of like this specific like Evilise, basically.
Yeah, and it's okay. So
they're gods indifferent to the plights of man, but they also want to maintain what they want to have go on, like. That's why
they're also not technically gods, right? They're just like really old, and they figured out super advanced technology, and spiritually ascended.
They're basically the closest thing that you would have to quote unquote gods, other than like the Espers,
right?
Because the Espers rose up against the Ocuria, and that's why they were sealed within like these stones.
Okay.
Like for Ultima, when you get Ultima, but she's optional, she was literally like the keeper of like all these Espers, but they all rose up against like the Ocuria, and that's how they all got like put in stones and shit. Or like Matthias, like tried to reach like the gods, and then he was punished for that by being bound to the Esper and everything. There's a lot of lore here, a lot of world building.
A lot of it isn't really explained explicitly unless you go searching for that information.
Or you fight Ultima and then get her bestiary information, but I don't suggest fighting Ultima. She's really difficult. Same with Zodiac.
So yeah, you meet these Akuria, and they basically explain that Vana is a heretic who wants to deviate from their divine plan, because up until now, like, pretty much everything that happens in Ivalice is according to their design. And then Vana went rogue and is causing all kinds of problems for their plan. And so they want Lady Ashe to pick up this new sword, the Treaty Sword, or again, the Sword of Kings, whichever one it is. It's a magic sword, doesn't matter. They want her to use this magic sword that they give her to cut new crystals from the Suncrest and use the power...
obliterate Arcades from the face of the planet, basically.
Right. So, Ashe is kind of left with a conundrum, and the rest of the party's like, you're not really gonna do that, are you?
And she's like, I don't know, maybe I should. Like this entire time, she's, like, very much, like, bent on revenge for, like, not only them, like, killing her, like, father and everything and forcing her into exile, but for the occupation and, like, all the pain and suffering her people have gone through. So, like, the last part of the game is really focused on Ashe and this whole, like, moral, like, conundrum of, is she gonna do it? Is it justifiable? Is it not? And so, yeah, then they go to the Pharos Lighthouse.
Well, so first off, I just want to say, like, this is the one and only time we see... Well, no, we see the Akurian one more time.
At the very, very end.
Well, at the Pharos Lighthouse.
Oh yeah, and then in the skyship Bahamut.
Yeah, but then we see Vana again.
Oh yeah, because the Okuria have been manipulating everyone by anyone who touches that stone, and, like, you even see, like, Vaughn talking to the stone in the beginning. It's because the Okuria have basically taken the form of his brother, and persuaded him to basically, like, go wherever, like, they need him to go and talk to whoever they need him to talk to. And that's why in the beginning you see him talking to stone and referring to it as his brother. And Ashe has the stone and she sees her dead husband.
Yeah, it's pretty scummy. And I like that the Okuria are designed to be very unnerving and off-putting, and you're not supposed to like them. So they're also very condescending, and the Pharos Lighthouse makes you hate them so much because every single pillar in that is talking down to you. They're just a bunch of pillars carved with messages from the Okuria, and they're just all shitting on you. Anyway, you get to the Pharos Lighthouse, which is I guess it's just a temple the Okurians built, and it houses the Suncrest, and no one else has ever gotten inside aside from the chosen one of the Okuria.
Basically, it's like this huge dungeon, and it's no fun to go through mechanically.
It's really not. And we also have Redus with us at this point, who
he stopped being a judge after war crimes happened, and he was like, oh no, that was a bad that I did. He basically is the reason, like, that Nebradia is, like, just consumed with mist and just this horrible hellish place covered in monsters now, because that was, like, the first place they tested manufactured nethicite. And he was like, I cannot be complicit in war crimes anymore, so he became a pirate.
Yeah, surprisingly, a lot of the solutions to I can't be complicit in war crimes anymore involve becoming a pirate.
It's this whole, like, idea of I can escape my past as long as it can't catch up with me kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, but...
Except then he decided to become the mayor of a pirate town, which seems like a poor idea if you're trying to constantly escape your problems.
I mean,
but
I guess nobody except for, like, specific people in Arcades know what you look like, because everyone's basically wearing their armor anyways, for the most part.
I guess,
I guess he's like, yeah, you know, cool, awesome.
So anyway, he goes with them, and you fight through this terrible dungeon, you get to the top, and everybody's there. Literally everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Sid's there. Gabranth is there.
He sits up from behind a pillar. He's like, I climbed this thing like with my hands. Yeah, it's this whole like, the whole party's there. Your final party's there. You have Redis with you. Ash confronts like Yokuria. She decides that she will not be like their puppet. She will not play into the scheme that they have planned, and she will defy the fate that they have basically written for her. And then
Sid's like, no, calm down, don't do that. Oh, first you fight Gabranth.
Yeah, and then like, and Gabranth was there because like Vayne had this conversation with him before, and he was like, well, you know what to do, like pursue peace with her, but if she attacks you, then like do what you gotta do, and, like
cough cough, kill her, cough cough,
or start a war, like basically egg her into like attacking, that kind of thing, or egg them into attacking. And Lars is like, don't do the bad thing, okay? And Gabranth is like, oh fuck. And like they do a pretty successful job of, I guess, talking him down, because it's like this whole idea of like revenge and like the fixation of revenge and not being able to let go of your trauma and your past. That whole conversation is about like Vaughn even being like, yeah, well, you like killed my brother, but like I had to move on from that. Like,
yeah, a lot of the theme of the end game here is about
reconciling with your trauma.
Yeah, like how do you move forward?
Exactly.
Like,
and like
kind of.
Yeah, and like Ash and like Vaughn are talking to him about this, and then Bosch opens his mouth. Then you fight Gabranth because he's like I'm mad, and then you fight him. He loses. And then Sid shows up, and then you fight Sid, and then that's when you kind of figure out that Sid is Balthier's dad, and it's complicated, and there's a lot of family drama there.
I do have a question, though. Like, what was the turning point for Vaughn where he decided to forgive Gabranth? Was it...
It was, I think, when he talked to Bosch, when he was like, I know you didn't, like, kill my brother, to, like, Bosch. And I think he has more of an issue with the Empire than with one specific person at that point. He also got rid of that rock. Like, he was like, I don't want this rock anymore, and he gave that to Ash.
Also, there is a moment... I played through the ending last night, so there is a moment where he shares a look with Ash, because he knows that Ash is undecided still about what to do about the rock at this point, about the Suncrist. And so... he's about to attack Gabranth and then decides not to.
Exactly. Like,
and I think
character development.
And it's there's no dialogue, and it's very subtle. So again, this is the kind of game where if you're not paying attention, you could miss some things, a lot of things. So I think that's kind of the... Vaughn is kind of the catalyst for choosing to go down a more reconciliatorial route with things. Or maybe, honestly, maybe Penelo is the catalyst for Vaughn. Anyway, I'm rambling.
I feel like Penelo was the catalyst for like Larsa, and the fact that like he's been really naive, and his ideals for the Empire have been kind of naive because he believes that his family has only ever done or enacted peaceful things, for example.
Right.
But then she sort of like brings in that perspective of, no, like, you have effectively colonized my country and we're like afraid of you, and I'm sorry, like that's just the way it is. Like, I want to believe that you're a good person. I want to believe that your brother's a good person, but it's very hard for me. And I feel like that perspective, especially for that faction per se, is like very important.
Yeah. I guess, and Larsa's important too because he provides a face where, like, well, there are a lot of people in Arcades too who are just people, right? And they're not necessarily evil, which makes this game very complicated. But I think for Vaughn, like, he sees Ash and he realizes, like, if he attacks Gabranth, like that is kind of validating her lust for revenge, which takes all of them down a bad route.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I feel like that. It's like sort of like a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
And then like the one person that can't let that shit go like starts the fight. Like,
exactly.
Like, Gabranth isn't ready to reconcile, like, even when he's, like, close to death. It's kind of like this, I trust you with my duty, and, like, I'm at peace now, but, like, shit's still, like, kind of rough. Like, man, when he died, like, that shit was, like, oh my god, I was like, there's closure, but there's also not closure. Why can't there just be more?
So...
But yeah, then we get to the air fortress. After Sid dies? He dies there, right?
I think so.
Yeah,
but
he
also,
dies in the lighthouse with Redis, right?
Well, it's complicated. No, because you kill you defeat him in battle, and then he is still talking to Vanan. He says something like, "It's time" or whatever, and he doesn't die. He like magically disintegrates or like ascends to a higher plane. I was actually going to ask you about that because I wasn't entirely sure what had happened because
he gets the I'm turning into mist and going into the aether death. That's what he gets.
Yeah, is that a death though? I was also kind of unclear about what mist was.
Like the life stream, it exists in like every Final Fantasy game.
Okay. Yeah.
It's the magical aether.
So
he gets his
dead, but he's not
his Disney
gone.
princess death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
what I like about this game, by the way, is that Balthier and like his father obviously don't get along, and like they kind of reconcile, but they don't, and I like that. I like the fact that this game like kind of
things can be messy.
Yeah, things can be messy. Like, sometimes people are not going to get along, or they're not going to like apologize to each other in the way that apologies happen, and I really appreciate that about this game. Like the characters just feel very real in that regard, I think.
Yeah. So they sunder the Suncrist, due to the valiant sacrifice of Redis, who wants to make up for his war crimes. And then one of my bigger problems with this game, and it's kind of exemplified in the airship Bahamut, is that there are just a lot of things that happen, and unless you have the appropriate context, whether it's in the manga or hidden somewhere in the bestiary or in an NPC bit of dialogue, you don't know why certain things happen, and the awakening of the airship Bahamut is one of those things.
It's just because Redis like did the Suncrist thing. They couldn't stop all the mist from coming out.
Yeah, but where did this city-sized airship come from?
Arcades was building it.
You'd think that it would have been mentioned at some point as a really big deal.
I feel like it was unfortunately just like a Square Enix thing where like, well, we gotta have Bahamut, So they had Bahamut to make it classic Final Fantasy, if you know what I mean.
Because honestly, I feel like you're right. And I feel like maybe what would have been... one small thing that would have fixed it is if instead of calling it Airship Bahamut, it's just Arcades. Like the city itself is this giant airship.
Well, it's just
thing.
It's like so all of the airships in this are named after Final Fantasy VIIs, and I feel like the airships themselves are like, again, like they're a sign of like the colonial rule because only the Arcadians really use these massive airships. And there's like more context to this in Revenant Wings and how people feel about the symbolism of the airship and the judges and why people will freak out when like seeing either of these things now after the war. But again, like you said, this game has this thing that is unfortunate about it where you need this extra context that you either get from like extra games or the Ultimania or developer interviews that are no longer like available to read from 2004 right. Or just other stuff,
So the Arcadians built the airship Bahamut. It wasn't a piece of Acurian technology?
Nope, Sid built it.
And it just got powered up by the release of so much mist?
They basically needed to make, or have, the deifacted and manufactured nethicite or whatever to, power it, right? So this is, a nuclear level, weapon. or warship, basically. It could just level entire cities. So they needed the power from the Sun Crest to power it. Because just having the stones or their regular magicite wouldn't be enough. So Vana had been helping Vayne manipulate this and put this all into motion so that all of this would happen because people can't untangle themselves from their fate with the Ocuria until like the very end of the game, and then that's it.
I guess I was confused because I thought they needed the Suncrest like intact or like pieces of it to run their super airship, but it was enough to just release that much magic energy that it just started flying.
It's like a Deus Ex Machina type thing, like, oh, the Suncrest exploded. I guess it sucked up all the mist. They do say this, I think, in a cutscene.
Yeah, I mean, they do. It's just I guess I don't understand what Cid's plan was then.
Just to make this happen because he believes in Vayne's vision of like
he didn't
history.
Want it to be destroyed.
It's just, again, it's in the end, it's like Vayne's vision, because like he parrots the same stuff in the beginning of the game. That's like, oh yeah, putting fate back in the hands of man.
Right. I guess it's like you just kind of have to accept that the release of all that mist got absorbed by their manufactured nethicite and started the ship.
It's like I have to accept that Aerith dies and can't be brought back with a phoenix down.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess just the other thing is like a couple NPCs mentioned, yeah, there's a real big airship. But it feels like maybe there should have been a cutscene where Vayne Solidor talks about, yeah, we're building this gigantic airship that is the size of a city.
Yeah, like in the beginning of the game or something when he was talking to Gabranth and Cid, like before Bujerba. Like it feels like that should have been mentioned there, because like
it could have been even outside of a window.
Yeah, like,
you know?
Like even me, like as someone who loves this game, like when I got to the end the first time, I was like, why am I on this big ass airship? What? Where did the Sky Fortress Bahamut come out of? I don't understand shit.
Also, I just think it would have been very it would have been thematically appropriate if it was just called the airship Arcades. It was literally the entire city of Arcades, like coming to literally fly above the people they've occupied.
Then you would have had civilians being brought into that too, and not just like the Imperial forces within the Sky Fortress Bahamut, I think. And that would have been very complicated.
It would have been complicated, but also like they're in a way kind of complicit with what's happening. So it would have I just think it would have been thematically appropriate, and like the Sky Fortress is fine at the end. It's just it falls on the ground. It's like upright and stuff. They would have been okay. I
guess, yeah. But yeah, like it's like one of these things where it's like there are plot contrivances in all Final Fantasy games, and the Sky Fortress Bahamut is one of them. Again, because I remember they actually explained, like, in an interview where they were like, yeah, there are no summons in this game. There are the Espers, and all the airships are named after Final Fantasy, like, summons. So they're still in the game, so it's still a classic Final Fantasy game. Like, that's something I think that was, like...
From a certain point of view.
Yeah, exactly. It was so that people who were only familiar with, like, specific Final Fantasy games, like the main lines, wouldn't feel too alienated. Because I know that was actually a legitimate complaint from people that, why can't I summon Shiva or Ifrit? What's Belius the Gigas? What's Chaos, the Walker of the Wheel? I don't know what this is. What is that? I don't like this game. I don't like it, you know?
Yeah. Gosh. If that's the reason you... Anyway, that's a dumb reason to dislike something, but...
Everyone has their reasons. Whether or not you agree with them is,
It's true.
Yeah.
So, in the finale of the game, you fly to the airship Bahamut, and essentially you have one last fight with Gabranth, which he's a tough cookie.
He's dying as he fights you, but
yeah. Somehow he's stronger.
Hatred is a very strong motivator. So is spite.
It's true. But the family of friends overcomes hatred and they are able to kind of help him see the light in a way.
I don't think they really helped him see the light. I just think he kind of understood what he needed to do at that point when he saw Larsa, and he was like, "Oh, I understand now." Because there's no real moment of reconciliation with him and Bosch. It's more like Bosch.
He passes on. I mean, yeah. He does pass on his duty to Bosch, which is kind of like the entire time we've seen him and Bosch interact. He's talking about how Bosch can't like fulfill a duty and how he's a traitor and how he left everything behind him. And then like I think it means a lot for him to on his deathbed be like, Bosch, I'm trusting my one and only charge to you.
Yeah, I think at the end there's like that kind of reconciliation, but until that point it's mostly like him finally moving beyond his hatred and finding a purpose, even if it's a very short-lived purpose, to protect Larsa in that moment when Vane's like, "Ah, yes, you're here to help me now," because he has basically helped Vane every step of his like way to get to what he wants. And when he turns his sword on Vane, that's like that moment of like he's like, "No, like I don't answer to you anymore," you know, because everyone calls him like the Hound, like, and even in like spin-off titles they just call him the Hound because that's all he is. He's just Vane's dog who does everything for Vane. That's like his existence. Which is, you know, yeah.
Well, and then Larsa also turns his sword on Vane, and Vane is really and truly alone. Mm-hmm. Aside from Vana, who makes one last appearance here.
They fuse together to become something truly terrible.
Yeah, following getting his butt handed to him, he gets possessed by Vana. He uses manufactured nethicite, and fuses that into his body, and goes berserk, and after getting his butt handed to him again, then he has a moment with Vana where Vana basically is like, he apologizes to Vana, and Vana's like, "Nah, brah, we succeeded way more than I ever thought we would.
Exactly.
This is great, and I will be with you till the end." So Vana is a real like evil bro. Well, question, is Vana evil?
I don't like the Ocuria very much. The Ocuria to me symbolize sort of like this whole like idea that you cannot untangle yourself from your fate, and they are sort of like the puppet masters to all of this. But
does that make Vana a good?
I mean, they're all working to their own means, right?
But like his mean was mostly to stop the Ocurian like predetermination of everything.
Exactly. But while using the Ocurian predetermination to sort of break the Ocurian predetermination. I still don't know where I stand with the Ocuria on that, actually. Like, I have to think about it all the time. I'm just like, like, yeah.
All the time?
Like, sure, they were, like, untangling themselves, like, from this destiny, and again, putting power or, like, destiny back in the hands of man, but, like, at what cost? But also, like, to always believe or to have your fate dictated for you by some like greater purpose. Like, what does that mean and what does that entail? Because we do have people that live with that kind of ideology. Sure, like, we don't have the Ocuria, but we do have spirituality that's sort of like somewhat like, you know, reinforces these beliefs and ideologies that, oh, everything happens for a reason, just put everything in God's hand, you know. Not calling out Christianity and Catholicism here or anything like that. But again, real world parallels to everything, and like how we view these different spiritual beliefs and what we choose to believe and what we choose to perceive or pursue as people, I suppose. You know, like, I feel it's complicated, and I'm not smart enough to have that conversation yet. Because
you're very smart.
Yeah, well, thank you.
You are a smart person.
You too, thank you.
See, we're smart.
Yeah, we tell each other we're smart. We know we're smart. Sometimes with a little reassurance, you could have a little compliment as a treat. But
I mean, like, my view on it is like the end goal of like freeing themselves from the yoke of like these condescending masters was definitely a good thing. But I also think that probably Vana, as like one of those creatures with that kind of a perspective and context, chose the vehicle for doing this as this fascist dictator, which really just kind of traded the like the supremacy of the Ocuria for like the supremacy of Vayne Solidor. Like Vayne was essentially setting himself up as a god and supreme leader, and that's objectively bad too. So, like, the outcome we eventually get, which is, you know, Vana and Vayne fusing together in a sense, and getting destroyed, that's probably the best outcome. Though, from the wider perspective that you have of having played Final Fantasy Tactics, that probably is what left them open to being, like, Ivalice open to being destroyed.
Basically, everything went as planned. Yeah, by unsealing the Espers, the High Seraph Ultima, like, just glasses everything in, like, 90 years, and then they get start all over again.
Yay!
Yay, Zodiac!
History is cyclical.
Yep, exactly. But that's kind of like what I expect. Like, I was like a bit surprised. There was like, oh, they enter a golden age now because like the world leaders actually know each other and they're trying to work together to like overcome like everything that has happened and try to establish peace. Revenant Wings happens and you kind of see like the beginning of that game is pretty good in the way that like there's someone impersonating a judge that shows up and they kind of talk about how everyone is freaking out about this because they're like, oh, the judges, no. We actually made Arcades have a law where they could no longer have any judges. So there's like a lot of political turmoil and strife around this, and again, like how a lot of these things that Arcades has used in the past have become symbols of oppression and of colonialism and how they've kind of had to discard these things to like establish and pursue peace with other nations, and how willing Larsa is to do that. But yeah, other than that, like after this, you know, Tactics happens and Tactics Advance and all that stuff, you know, things like that. Like there are spin-offs, unofficial sequels, that kind of thing. But yeah, it goes on.
Yeah, it's one of those things like as a story, it's hard to end on a note of, you know, these things have happened again. These things have happened before, and they will happen again, because that doesn't make for a very good story. But that's I think that's part of why I like the ending of Final Fantasy XII. Like, it does give you a sense of catharsis, but also the world is still a mess, and there's still a lot going on, and some things have returned to kind of a status quo, but in a lot of ways, there's still a lot of healing that needs to be done. A lot of people who are hurt by the occupation need to be able to kind of find that same catharsis that our heroes did, and yeah, kind of that. It probably would have been maybe a more interesting way to go with a sequel, like kind of taking the Lord of the Rings Return of the King approach of, like, you know, there are some wounds that won't heal, you know, and learning how do you live with that, you know, as Kiss Me
Goodbye begins to play.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know. What are your overall thoughts about this game? I know we've been talking about it for a while now, but
just in general, like just the end of the game.
I mean, the end of the game, like overall, like, yeah.
I mean, like, again, Final Fantasy XII is arguably one of my favorite Final Fantasy games, alongside like 10 and Tactics and everything, and 8, just because again it's so staunchly like anti-imperialist in my opinion. In my onion, it is staunchly anti-imperialist, and again, it's brave enough to talk about these things like colonialism and occupation and what happens to the people, like under colonial and imperial rule, which a lot of Final Fantasy games, like previously, like Final Fantasy IV, for example, you are literally part of like a nation that has occupied and like hurt people, and you interact with someone who is a victim of that. But the game doesn't go into like a lot of detail about this. And I feel like 12 and Tactics in the Evil East world kind of tackle these issues head on, and I think 12 is a really good place to start if you want to find other Final Fantasy games that have similar messages that kind of carry on throughout like this entire extended universe of Evil East. Um, and again, I just think it's such like an interesting and like politically motivated game, and it's out there saying things that are still relevant now and will still be relevant as long as like colonialism and imperialism and this sort of like, I don't know, like
Are active forces in the world.
Exactly. As long as these things exist, these messages will still be relevant.
Which, to kind of oddly tie back to an earlier conversation, like, those forces will likely always be at work in the world until we are able to move past capitalism as an active part of our global society. Just because capitalism involves exploiting people who have less power. It involves expanding, like, ever expanding markets. Like, those are the things that it relies on to function. And so, in a sense, colonial occupation and rule is very much linked to how that system can function. And unfortunately, that it's going to, like, the themes of Final Fantasy XII will remain very timely until that point in time, I guess.
Exactly. But yeah, I like the game. My favorite Final Fantasy character of all time is in this game, so it's, it's hard not to like this game. I like the ending, even though it resonates with me differently now than it did when I was a teenager. I like it. It's a good game.
I really like Bosch a lot. I love his recurring joke, meta joke about being the leading man.
Oh, Balthier? You said Bosch.
Yeah. Oh, Bosch.
It's okay. He's good too. He tries to make a joke once, then everyone's like, "Wow, that was really rude, Bosch." And he's like, "Oh, I should have never made a joke ever again. I'll never make a joke in my life."
At one point, I was gonna try and cosplay Bosch, like,
really,
years and years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. When I had like facial hair and such.
Oh.
Not now. I don't think I could get away with it now, but
it's okay. Now you can be Lady Ashelia Banargan Dalmasca.
Banargan. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like I have the cosplay chops to pull off a Final Fantasy character just yet. But we'll see. Maybe one day.
eBay's always there.
eBay's always there for me.
eBay's always got you.
So, closing thoughts. Why is this one of the best games, period, to you? You really wanted to talk about it, and I really wanted to hear your thoughts on it. And yeah, you get the final word on this one.
Well, I think this is, again, one of the best games ever, if not one of the best Final Fantasy games out there, purely because it's, again, extremely honest in its views about imperialism and colonial occupation in ways that most modern Japanese media or other Final Fantasy games are not in this day and age. And I think it's valuable as a piece of media that, again, looks at these things, questions them, and allows us as the audience to kind of change our views based on what's written in the game, to be more sympathetic towards people who have obviously like experienced colonial rule or oppression, or have been occupied or are being occupied at some point in time. And this game allows us, again, to like see these struggles in some way and empathize with them if we haven't already been aware of them or become aware of them through this. I also think, again, this is one of the best localized and translated games in existence, and has some of the best voice work in any video game still, and some of the best facial animations as well, surprisingly, as strange as that sounds. But yeah, all in all, I think it's a really fantastic Final Fantasy game, and it has a really strong political message.
Yeah, I do have to say, like, I always appreciate having you on the show, just because you can bring in that Japanese perspective and like remind, especially for like Final Fantasy games, remind people that the primary audience for these games is Japanese.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Like there's, the
which
global market and global appeal, but ultimately like these are Japanese people writing games for other Japanese people.
right, exactly. And I think that's a perspective that often gets kind of glossed over in especially in Western circles where people just kind of tend to latch onto things from different countries and say like, "Oh, this was about us the entire time." Um, but uh, yeah, I do have to say like we have not spent a lot of time talking about like the soundtrack or the visuals, but like the in-engine animations for this game are incredible for a PlayStation 2
Oh,
game.
absolutely. Like
Like,
even the eyes like are moving around and stuff like just in cutscenes you can see how nervous some characters are or like how they feel with like the slightest tick of like the side of their mouth or like their eyes moving to the side slightly. It's very good. It's really well done.
and like articulated hand gestures, and the hair is fantastic, especially Fran's hair.
Mhm.
Is just really great. Um, and yeah, and the soundtrack is. I don't know that it's necessarily the best Final Fantasy soundtrack. A lot of it is very much geared towards more kind of an providing an ambiance rather than like a memorable tune.
Yeah, it's
Um,
the OST is, it's tactics and that's it. Like it's the only theme I really remember is like the theme of the Empire, but that's just because of the 20-second E3 trailer they had for this game, and I was like, whoa, and that was that.
um, yeah, and also like a lot of the tracks kind of loop. It's a sound. It's one of those soundtracks that is designed not to draw too much attention to itself,
Hmm.
which makes it good for like kind of casual listening, I
Hmm.
guess. Like if you're working on something, this is a great soundtrack to throw on. But yeah, like just the presentation and the soundtrack are perfect for the gameplay of this game, are amazing at conveying the story and a lot of subtle nuances that would have otherwise been lost if this was made like on the PlayStation instead.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I believe like the first time I talked about this game, I said it wasn't one of the best games, period. But kind of looking at it again through newer eyes, because I hadn't replayed it since I played it in like 2007
Hmm.
or whatever. Um, there's definitely a lot more going on than I gave it credit for. Um, I think the first time I played it, I just kind of lost track. Like, if you've been listening for the past 2.5 hours, you know that uh, the plot is a little bit complicated at times, and I kind of lost track of why things were happening. But now I have a better handle on that, which allowed me to kind of look past the basic plot points and more at the character development and like the motivations and kind of the search for catharsis and the themes. And this game is a lot richer than I had imagined it was previously. So thank you for helping me realize that and see that and giving me the opportunity to play this again.
No problem. Thank you for coming back to reevaluate Final Fantasy XII and letting me talk about one of my favorite games and my favorite character.
Which, one more time, is.
Gabranth. Yeah.
Okay. Gabranth is best boy.
He's okay. I just like again like I always get asked like why is Gabranth your favorite Final Fantasy villain? And it's just because he's just so normal. Like he he doesn't want anything more than like something personal to him. And like other Final Fantasy villains usually have this aspiration to become godlike or to like ascend to some sort of like godhood or status as like a deity, but he's just like I'm somebody whose war life has been completely torn apart by war and the only thing I have is my anger, and I think that's just so strong. like for a character that's so powerful, and I think people kind of underestimate that.
Yeah, it's a very human emotion and motivation, and it's not something that we get in Final Fantasy, like you're saying. And it makes him stand out and special in, like, I don't know, it's that, to me, that's part of what made Final Fantasy IX really special to me, is that a lot of the struggles that those characters were going through were very human struggles, like fearing death, or, you know, not knowing how to proceed after a major career change, or like stuff like that. Like, that's part of what made it really resonate with me. And like, especially in this particular setting where, you know, you're dealing with gods and demons and kings and queens and empires and all of that, in the middle of like that maelstrom of insanity, there's just this one guy, and he's not even a bad guy. He just feels very strongly that he needs revenge on his brother.
Yeah, sometimes,
and that's it.
Sometimes you just really don't like your twin brother for, like, you know, 20 years of your life, and then you reconcile with it before you die. You know?
Sometimes it really be like that.
Exactly. Sometimes it's just like that, you know?
Well, thank you, Kazuma, for coming on. It has been a pleasure as always. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
You can find me at JusticeKazi_ on Twitter.com, and you can find me at JusticeKazi on Twitch. And I stream every day, well, not every day, but Wednesday to Sunday from 2:30 Central Eastern Time to 6 p.m. Central Eastern Time. Usually hanging out, playing a variety of games, talking about Japanese politics, the lack of LGBTQ plus rights in Japan, and, you know, expressing those anti-imperialist opinions that I have become known for.
And I know you mentioned it in part 1, but part 2, we haven't mentioned it yet. What is the name of your streaming collective? Streaming
yeah, so I have recently
team?
I've recently become a member of Rainbow Arcade, and Rainbow Arcade is a super cool Twitch team that is comprised of other LGBTQ plus streamers of all shapes, sizes, ethnicities, and orientations. And we are a community of LGBTQ plus streamers hoping to provide like a safe and inclusive space for, again, people who are of that group and are also sexual and racial minorities as well.
Well, that is awesome. I encourage everyone to check out.
Wait, did I say the name of the stream team? Did I say Rainbow Arcade?
Rainbow Arcade?
Yeah, I said Rainbow Arcade. I think I said Rainbow Arcade. Anyway, it's
yeah,
Rainbow Arcade. Okay, sorry.
You did. You said it twice.
I can't remember anything.
You can't remember anything. It's because we filled our heads with too much information about Final Fantasy XII.
Yes.
So, yes, please check out Rainbow Arcade and Justice Kazi on Twitch. You will not regret it, I promise. And if you enjoyed the show, please like, comment, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. It genuinely does help us if you do those things. And if you even feel inclined, you could leave a review. That also helps. You can find us on SoundCloud, Libsyn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're on every dang podcasting platform. And you can also, if you really enjoyed the show, please head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/bestgamesperiod, where you can support us for $1 or more per month and get access to a slew of cool features like exclusive Patreon streams and exclusive episodes, as well as listening to the show a week early.
Yeah.
So if you like what we're doing here, you can hop on that. And honestly, every little bit helps. We are getting close to $100 per month, which is huge. And your support is incredibly valuable because it helps keep this podcast going, because honestly just hosting it and putting in the time to edit it is a lot of work, and with things being crazy, yeah, it's hard to squeeze in all the time, but I do it because I love you. Again, thank you so much for coming on this week. You are the best. And
No, you.
No, stop. And we'll see you next time on the Flippity Dippity.